Hello and welcome to Yerushalmi Berachos, Daf Mem Dalid in the Ozvater print. I'm going to share a quick ha'ara, an interesting idea, and then Nidarai Ashalem B'li I'm going to finish talking about some of the important Meforshim. My goal is still to include historical stuff and Musar Hashkafa, some halachic discussions, of course, not halacha l'maisa, and of course Hashkafic ideas as well. But Be'ezer Hashem, I want to make sure that we covered some of the main Meforshim as we're getting to the midpoint of Brachos here in the Ozvater print. So, Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, Hayimispal im Dume Chama. He used to daven Mincha with the redness of the sun, which means right as the sun was setting, he would daven. Kadeshe Yalav Mor Shemayim Kol Yom. So he'd have fear of heaven the whole day. Now, and then Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina even said, Yehei Chalki Mispalim im Dume Chama. Halvai, I should be rewarded like these people. Ma Tam, because it says Al Zos Yispal Kol Chasei Lechem Leis Mitzo, which the Bible uses for different things. On Daf Ches Leis Mitzo Zu Mitzah, to daven ahead of time. But here it's Leis Mitzvah Shal Yom, as a day is starting to be found. Now, here's what's very interesting. First of all, the idea is that when you start your day off right, you follow in that path. That's what to think about. Sometimes we say, our kids will say, I'm having a bad day, everything's going to be terrible, and we try to correct them. There actually is some truth to that if you're on a bad foot, it could be something that carries forth. Tov achar safim shison. If you're on a good foot, it follows forward. So I always answer, you're right, we started on a bad foot, but let's try to fix it. There's always tshuva, and there's always ways to fix, and that's also important. But there's definitely an important thing of starting the day off right, which is an important lesson here, that Imamish wanted to start his day off with tefillah, which is the way to connect to Hashem, like we spoke about, by nit tefillah is the way to connect to Hashem. But the question is, should you wait that late to daven Mariv? Now, here's what's very interesting, and that is that the Bavli on Daf Chaf Tesman Beis, so in Brachos, it says this exact opinion, and it even quotes that Marava in Eretz Yisrael, that they actually condemned this practice, and they were not in favor of waiting till the last minute because an emergency might happen, and then a person is left without any time to daven Mincha, and they'll miss Mincha. But the problem is that the Yerushalmi never says that, and the Yerushalmi here, or seemingly in most other places, I'm not a bucky in Yerushalmi, but a lot of the Meforshim bring this problem down, including the Aruch HaShulchan, which I'll quote in a second. So they don't say this that it's a problem, and in fact it's complimented in the Yerushalmi. So if you take a look in the Aruch HaShulchan, obviously there's a historical part here as well, but let me just start with actually the facts. So it's in Hilchos Tefillah of Mincha and Mariv, Siman Reish Lamed Gimel, Sif Katan Ches. He says, I want to scream on the minhag that people daven Mincha very late, till right before Shkia, and it's wrong because the Gemara in Chav Tesvav says explicitly not to. You're going to ask me the Yerushalmi Reish Parak Daled, which is our Yerushalmi here. Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina was mispalim into Mechama, so he says, first of all, he brings down like Spamini, there's a Tzarchi in there, Ayin Sham, but then he says no. The ones the Limud Zchus I have is that it's because of Tirdos Aparnasa, they were working the whole day, Hashem Yirachim, so therefore, there is a positive quality there, but it's not the optimal at all. Now, keep in mind that the Aruch HaShulchan was the one that in his city in Navardik, there was so much Chilul Shabbos that he was masaking that the whole city was Makabel Shabbos early, and it was the joke in Navardik was that, and he almost left the city because of this, because people weren't Makabel him at first. The joke was that in Navardik they celebrate Shabbos on Friday, so he was extremely mocked about early Zmanim. We know Rechaim Kanievsky also always davened as early as possible, and he was someone that was a medakik mitzvah. So as early as he could daven chakras, that's when he davened chakras of Asikin. As early as he could daven mincha, that's when he davened. As early as he could daven marv, that's what he did. So this is definitely, there's an Indian to start your day off right, but this is definitely not something that's recommended by the poskim, and that's important to keep in mind. It's why, even though we learn a Gemara, we have to be careful to make sure that we understand halacha l'maisa. Okay, let's come back to some of the Mefarsha Yerushalmi, and again, as things come up, we'll hopefully elaborate more. And also very importantly, as other interesting historical things come up, we'll do that. But I want to make sure I cover the basic things. So there's a famous Mefarish called the Maraf Fulda, or Tosis Maraf, which is the same thing. It's Eliyahu of Fulda, which is a city where he was from, and they were published in Amsterdam in 1710. But not in its entirety. And many people call him Hamafarish because he was such a popular Pirush and Yerushalmi, and he's a Pashtan, and there's a lot there, amazing stuff to learn. The Sedei Yoshua is from Yoshua ben Vistin, and he was born in 1590 to 1668, and he was from Constantinople. And if you recognize that last name, Ben Viniste, there's a reason for that, because his brother, Rav Chaim ben Viniste, was actually the author of the Knesset Gedola. So there's a tremendous connection there. The Karban Eda is probably one of the top three most famous Mefarsha Yerushalmi. Who am I to say that? But I'm saying everybody knows the Karban Eda and everybody knows the Pnei Moshe. So let's talk about them too. Karban Eda and the Shiari Karban, which is like the Eon part, was composed by Rav David Frankel, and he was a Rav in Berlin, and he lived from 1707 to 1762, and he covers most of Moed, Nashim, and Nezikim, and they were published in around 1743 and later. And of course, the Pnei Moshe is probably one of the most famous Meforshim of the Yerushalmi. He was the Rebbe of the Graf for a very short amount of time. Rav Moshe Margulies, he was the Rav of Amsterdam, and what's it called? And it was published in 1775. So you can imagine the United States is being founded in 1 year. The Yavitz was living at that time, etc. And that's what was going on. The Bir Hagra is probably one of the top 3 most famous. And again, we talked about him earlier, so Ayin Sham. But basically, the Reb Chaim Volozhin confirmed that he was aware of the Talmidim that wrote over the Gra's Pirush on Yerushalmi, and that he could testify that it's accurate. Of course, then later on it creeped in. There are 2 different Girsos. Ayin Sham. The Radvaz is a very famous. He was a grandfather of Rav Chaskel Abramsky, and he wrote a very famous pirush called the Tosas Harid, based on his name, Rav Yaakov David Wolowski of Slutsk, and he finished his life in Svat. He was born in 1845 and died in 1914. He had a very, very eclectic life on many, many fronts. And there's a story that's going around from Rav Elimelech Biederman that you might have heard already, but this is the person that basically, when he almost died, and he was very, very sick, and they looked at his zechuyos and they said, "Let him live. He still has to write a pirush on Yerushalmi." They said, "No, that's not gonna save him." And they said, "Let him live. He's a rav of the city. He takes care of people. Look at all the chesed he does, all the almanos and the Yisomim that he supports." They said, "That's not enough." And they said, "Okay, look at his Tosas Shabbos," and that he lived by. What's the pshat? So I believe that the pshat is that when a person, when you give extra, that's where you show your love for Hashem. That's the ultimate love. It's good to be a Baal Chesed. It's good to learn Yerushalmi. It's good to learn Torah. But the extra that you give, the Tosefes that you give to Hashem, that's the biggest chus that we have. It's the extra that shows that. So that's not what's I heard from Reisman Shlita, that of bracha. It's because that shows that you do extra because you love Hashem, and that's where we go to that more extent, and that's the biggest chus we have. The Toledo's Yitzchak and the Sefer Tevuna was written by Rav Yitzchak Isaac Krishakivskov. He was a Rav of Poltava, and he wrote his pirush in Moscow in 1965, and was rescued from communist Russia at great risk by Rav Tzvi Harry Bronstein Zatzal. And if you look, you could actually look on YouTube or online, and you could find a video of him presenting his Yerushalmi pirush that he got out and published to Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe is very excited about this pirush. You could look; it's a very, very fascinating. What's it called? Part of history, and he founded the Mechon Mutzal Me'esh, saved from the fire, and put out a lot of Meforshim on the Yerushalmi, and it's an amazing pirush that is good in your library if you're learning or teaching Yerushalmi. Of course, there's the Beer of Chaim Kanievsky, which is brilliant and amazing. I believe it's just about complete. I have access to a set in a shul that I sometimes learn at, and it's his pshatim are simple to the point. There's a famous story with Chaim Kanievsky that when his father passed away, the Stipler, he started giving a shir, and he gave a shir in Yerushalmi Berachos, and from those notes he wrote a sefer. And then he called off the shir and stopped giving it. He did not want to be a Magashir. His father had told him not to be Marvet's Torah through answering people's shilos, etc. So they asked him, "What's pshat? Why'd you stop?" So he said he doesn't have time to prepare anymore. So they said, "How much time does it take you to prepare the Yerushalmi shir that you were giving?" He said 5 minutes. And he didn't have time to be Masader in his head. That's how much he is medactic. Halvai, I could account for 5 hours or 5 days in my life. He didn't have 5 minutes to spare. The Giligoni Hashas is a famous Rav Yosef Engel, 1859 to 1920. Very lumdish and very interesting. I don't quote from him that much. I'm not so familiar with a lot of his works. And then Yefei Einayim is a very famous pirush on Bavli by Rav Aryeh Leib of Bilsk, who lived in 1820 to 1886, and he's usually published in the back of the Gemara, usually after the Mefarshi HaGemara, like the Rishash and etc. And he really ties in the Bavlis and Yerushalmis. I mean, he was a Bucky Utzim, and sometimes when you look there, you find other Yerushalmis that are on that Bavli, and sometimes I check there if I'm talking about a sugya where there's a contradiction between Bavli and Yerushalmi. There's a lot of interesting aras. Anyway, the Darai La Shem Hashalem, which we are mushva omed from Har Sinai, let us continue steiging and growing in our learning. But I hope that paid back my debt to you. And thank you so much for being on this journey with me. And I really appreciate all the feedback, questions, and comments, and your patience with me as well, because sometimes there are things that there's what for you to argue on, which is exactly the point of this segment, so that you could help teach me and make sure I understand things properly and better. So thank you for being on this journey with me, and hatzlacha in your learning.